Hello there, welcome back. This is my first full week back after the break. So I'm starting to go back towards more serious subjects again. I hope you enjoyed last week's stuff. It was a bit silly there with things like Friday the 13th, but now I'm kind of trying to go back to more complicated films and like more difficult subject matters. I'm still going to do silly things. My Wednesday video will be nice and silly, but until then they'll be a bit darker, the videos. They'll be going towards the darker films. First thing I'm going to be doing is Mishima from Paul Schrader. This is a film, this is a Criterion edition disc. It was a film made in 1985, it was released in 1985, it was written by Paul Schrader and Leonard Schrader, directed by Paul Schrader. It was a film that came and went and round throughout the world. It was well praised. It got good response in Cannes. It was good critical response everywhere. But in Japan, it was never properly released because of the controversy making a film about Mishima, and because Mishima was a very controversial figure. So even though some Japanese money went into it, no one would ever admit to it. And it was, even though Toho apparently had the distribution deal, it's never been released through Toho. So it's always been a film that's never had proper release in Japan. It's been around the world, fine. In Japan, nothing. It's also a film that Paul Schrader said pretty much ruined his Hollywood career, because it was so weird and so different from what everyone else is making. It was like, he said, they just looked at him and said, "You're not one of us," type of thing. Because he'd had a hit with American Gigolo, and then he'd done Cat People, which was a flop, but it was an interesting flop. But this one was like, okay, he's a weird artist. Now we're not going to keep funding him. So he ended up going into the independent circuit, where he's been for the last 30 odd years. And where he's had ups and downs as a director. I mean, there's been some really great stuff like Light Sleeper, Affliction, Autofocus, his most recent one, First Reformed. There's been lots of good films. He's also done a couple of films that haven't been so great, but he's stayed as a very interesting director. He's one of those directors, you always just want to know what he's doing next, because there's always a chance he's going to be interesting. So I've always kept an eye out for his films, always looked forward to his films, because even some of the more flawed films like Forever Young, I've really enjoyed. So there's always a chance with Schrader there's going to be something fascinating coming on. But I think the film that kind of cemented him as like an artist, as a huge artist, was Mishima. Even though he'd done some good stuff before. I mean, American Gigolo was very good. His first film, Blue Collar, was amazing. There's Hardcore was interesting. Cat People was interesting. But Mishima was like where everything kind of came together. And I think from here until Light Sleeper, he kind of had an identity crisis where he made some films that weren't quite as clear as some of his films, like stuff like Comfort Strangers or Patty Hearst. He kind of struggled till the early 90s, then he kind of seemed to get back on track a little bit. But he is a director, a writer-director who seems to have periods where he's really focused on periods where he tries things that maybe weren't the best idea. The funny thing is, the career he's most like in some ways, even though it's very different in other ways, is Brian De Palma, even though those two do not get on. I mean, if you just look at any Twitter feed with Schrader or comments and things, they obviously do not go on. They fell out over Obsession, and I think over the years they've just never really got on. But they both had a kind of career of sometimes inside the Hollywood system, sometimes been outside the independent system, doing their own thing a lot of the time. They both have a romantic streak through their films, but also have a cynical streak. They're very much about the subject matter and behind the subject matter and what makes up the artist and what makes up what you're looking at. So there's lots of kind of ties between both of them, but they don't seem to get on. No, there's a kind of mismatch somehow. I mean, I think those two and John Milius are the three most interesting in the movie, perhaps. The other ones who have bigger successes like Scorsese and Spielberg and Coppola, I don't think they was interested in something like Schrader or Milius or De Palma. I think they're the more interesting. They're the ones that are going to come out with something really weird. And obviously Milius wrote Apocalypse Now, which was one of Coppola's biggest successes, and Schrader wrote most of the really good Scorsese films. But outside of Goodfellas, the really distinctive Scorsese films were written by Paul Schrader. Really, he's kind of like the engine, And De Palma's done a lot of interesting stuff, and also some stuff that's not worked out so well. So I digress slightly there, but my main point is, this is a film only a director like Schrader would have made. You have to be a bit weird to think that doing a film with Mishima was a good idea. He was just interested in a suicidal artist, apparently, in this. He tried with Hank Williams and it didn't work out for him. They tried it with Mishima, and Mishima was much more to his liking, and it took a while to get the rights, and he had to work with his brother, who was having difficulties with. But despite all the problems, everything came through and did a great film. And it's a film that's lasting. It's not a film that jumps up to the top of the polls like The Godfather 2 or something. But I think it's a film that's been lasting consistently for a long time. I think it's increased its the appreciation for it has slowly been increasing over the years as people start to see this is a phenomenal film. And I think that the Criterion release really helps it. I mean, it's just a wonderful film, and it is very eccentric and very. It's only a film you only think, well, this is a very Schraderish film. Most directors wouldn't make a film like this. And it's playing with structure the way Schrader does. I mean, Tarantino gets a lot of credit for playing with structure, but I mean, he's taking stuff from like the 50s with Kubrick and things who are bringing up structure with The Killing. But in the contemporary terms, the person who first started playing with structure a lot was Schrader, with stuff like Raging Bull, where she wrote the flashbacks and stuff with the brother, and this. If he's always kind of playing around with what's available and what's the artificial in the story he's telling, and what does that mean to the storyteller. So he's done it in a more subtle way in a lot of films, like Taxi Driver's Unreliable Narrator. And I don't think Tarantino's ripped him off or anything. I think he's just been influenced. It's like, oh, I see this, I can do this my way. I don't think there's anything sinister or anything. I think it's just like there'll be a lot of people who are in the arts can see what someone's done and think, I can take this and switch around to what I need from it. I mean, I think that's just the way it is. Say we Schrader's taken it from novels, probably. He was probably influenced by like Bresson films and Femme Deuce were doing stuff like that, and going back and forward, which were taken from novels. I think it's just a slow progression. But Schrader was the first of the modern writers to really sort of bring this to the fore. He would take a very existential way, and then it went to Tarantino, and it was more about the form itself. So I mean, it's just one of those interesting ways that art develops. Right, to the film, since I've talked forever about Schrader himself, Mishima. It's a beautiful package. I think I've covered it already in a video, how great the package is. You get like documentaries that are making the film, you get commentary, you get a great transfer of the film itself. It's really beautiful. It's a 4K digital transfer, so you've got a really good quality transfer. So hopefully when videos up to 4K, this will, like fully as a deal, you probably get a better transfer from this. But it's still very beautiful. Just watching TV, it's just gorgeous. The film is one of those films I saw when I was like 16, and it just blew me away. It was one of those films I saw, it's like, oh, this is what film is. This is what an ambitious film is. Because I think sometimes you see films that you can see are striving to be ambitious, but they're not actually ambitious. Like, maybe visually they're ambitious, but thematically they're not. I think I've always that problem with a lot of films where I think a lot of directors who you're meant to think are really ambitious and really deep. I'm not going to name any guilty parties here, I was trying to explain the feeling you get sometimes you watch the films and it's like, yeah, there's lots of interesting things here, but it's not that interesting. It's like, it's been taking stuff that I've seen elsewhere and done its own thing with it, but it's not, you don't get the feeling the person's making the film is really grasping the film. They're not really getting behind and tearing it apart, they're just like making their sort of vague film and stylising it. It doesn't really feel completed. This film, Mishima feels complete in itself. That's what I like about Schrader. And one of the problems with Schrader is, because he didn't start off in film, he wasn't allowed to see films for years when he was a kid. There is a kind of grace that's missing to some of his shots. Sometimes it's over intellectualised, like he's doing a shot that is beautiful, but it's almost like hitting the nail on the head a bit too much, because he doesn't get subtlety of shots. Other times he does, it just depends, he's kind of hit and miss in that area. It's one flaw he's got, really, is he can be a bit like literal minded and like visual metaphors. And sometimes his shots are floating, but sometimes they miss out on what he's going for. In this film he doesn't. This film is it's very clear what he's going for. He's using his intuition a lot, it seems. He seems to be working with good collaborators, and he seems to have been allowing everything to come through him, and it feels, even because it's so artificial, it's almost like he's engaging a part of his brain that knows that filmmaking and fiction is fake, so he can engage upon the fantasy of creating art and making that the subject. And I way that sometimes I think when he's trying to be do a more realistic subject, I think by trying to be realistic, sometimes he shows himself up by being overly schematic in what he's making. It's just that's one of those things, and even in some of the good films there's little moments where you're thinking, that's a bit too much. But that kind of tension leads to a lot of his better films as well. It's like, I don't think he could have the great writing and the really interesting films without that kind of overemphasis. Sometimes I think it's tied to what's good about him, so it's like, well, that's part of the package. And it's not like he's doing it all the time, it's just every so often it kind of... Every director has this. Every director has a little tale that sometimes they use to... that becomes their problem they have to get over. I mean, if you see a Spielberg film, he's notorious for explaining the film at the end, in case you didn't get it. And usually it's like, that's the least interesting part of the film. Please don't do that again. Scorsese sometimes is so vague that it was like, what was the point of making this film? There doesn't a point to this. The directors every director has a flaw. I mean, De Palma is very good visually, but sometimes he's overstates something visually as well. Like, he's a bit hacky sometimes, but visually, like, he seems to... Again, with him, it's not all the time, it's just once in a while. Like, he overstates something, and probably by the time he's committed to it, there's no other thinking around it anymore. So to Mishima. Mishima in itself is a wonderful film. It's about art. It's a film where Schrader can actually take the darkness within his kind of character and put a subject matter that's complicated. I mean, Mishima was like one of the great Japanese artists who he wrote stuff like Temple of Golden Pavilion, these big books that became like very successful, very much something you could promote to Japan. Like, this is Japan's soul, this is what we want from Japan. Mishima became like one of the greats for Japan. But he was a very complicated soul, he was a very difficult person, he had lots of demons. Like, he was brought up by his maternal grandmother, and there was a very complicated relationship because he was taken away from his mother, then he went back to his mother, and he was very career focused, which I heard Schrader was as well when he was a young man. He wanted to become a great writer, and he did. And then he found success with something that fascinated him. His art fascinated him, but he also became a person who was complicated. He really had a lot of difficulties, and he created almost a persona of who he was, which always had to change. And he was always like readjust himself to, so his fiction, his life became entwined. It was like his art was an expression of him, he was an expression of his art. It was all kind of sketched together. He he had problems feeling things, like he felt he was too much in his head. He had trouble finding a genuine emotion or attachment to things. He just needed something that was more complicated. He just needed something. So Schrader could work in what he was interested in. He was interested in what's fascinating about art, what's art about to the person making it, and how does it go wrong, where does it lead to, what's the disruption of art to an artist. And he's choosing not someone who's a middle of the road artist, he's choosing someone who's at the peak of their form, and how dysfunctional they are, and how they don't find warmth in their art, even though they do when they're doing it. Outside of that, they need to transform. So he finds him. He tries to transform his body. He starts off as a weakling in his head because he's a genius, so he just works in his head. Then he realises he's flabby, so he works in his body, becomes a bodybuilder, and then he looks around to the world and sees this world is corrupt. I need to enforce my willpower on it and try and do something with the world. So he becomes as a right-wing guy who's preaching traditional values, preaching what's been lost in the culture. But there's a suggestion that a lot of this is still tied to his flaws of character, his need to connect to people, or to connect to what his ideal of himself is and what his ideal of art is. So, I mean, as the film goes on, you're going backwards and forwards through his life, but also through his art, what he's writing. So you get a section from the Golden Pavilion story, a section of a story about masochism with a homosexual undertone, and you get a story later on about the need to try and transform your world by military expansion, and just this feeling of the older ways are better. It's very complicated because obviously this is a kind of increasing madness by Mishima. He's obviously unsure of himself, insecure, and he's going towards mania, and he's pushing further and further into what he needs to get some emotional attachment to life for a reason to keep living. And according to the extras, he was fascinated by him. He made suicide, wondering why he did it, what was up there. So obviously he had a suicide thing going on in his head. And there's a lot of... He ended his life by attacking... Taking these cadets, he created this little militia, which was just a show militia. No one took it seriously as a force. It was just for show, because he was a great artist to let him do it, and he let them visit like military bases and train at military bases because he was Mishima and he was a good PR for them. Then one day he invaded one of the offices, one of the main generals, and held him hostage so he could actually have a big speech to the people and tell them what's wrong with the world. It did not go too well for Mishima. It was a bit of a disaster. He ended up having a speech, everyone booed him, and then he was pretty seppuku, and he gets his head cut off by one of his followers as a ritual suicide. And a lot of people thought this was a showmanship thing. He didn't really expect anything from this movement. It was just a show. It was an artistic achievement. And since then, Mishima's name's been under a cloud because no one's sure what to make of him. They love his books, but the man disturbed Japan. And that's what Schrader's about, is why did he disturb Japan? What was he aiming for? What was so wrong in Japan he needed to do all these extreme things to try and find some meaning to his life? And what was the separation between art and life that was causing him this mania? And that's what it's about, but it's not trying to give you concrete reasons for why he did anything. This is Schrader more subtle, in that he doesn't tell you why he did it. He doesn't tell you why he thinks he did it. He's just like, this is what he did, this is his actions, these were the things that were pushing him on, and make the mind up for the rest of yourself. We're not going to explain it. Only at the end does he feel like in defeat and like embarrassment, as everything he's planned for has failed and he's about to commit suicide. Does he find the combination of like the ecstasy of failure, but also ecstasy of combining the pen and the sword and the pen and art to find a real feeling for art. So maybe you needed failure, maybe you needed something that was not a success, but probably was more complicated than that. And we were never able to understand exactly what it was. It's all tied to Japanese culture, what you expect from Japanese culture, what you expect from history. And it's just complicated. And this film respects the complications. So they show you pieces from different stories, which gives you an idea of what his mania was, what his problems were, like his the masochistic relationship, which leads to the death of the protagonist, shows the dark side of human nature, searching for death. The military justice also leads to suicide, and it leads to death because someone can't live in the real world. The first story just leads to the burning of the Golden Pavilion because the man involved can't take seeing something so beautiful as he feels beauty is corrupting. It's all about the corrupting nature of art and the corrupting nature of beauty, and it's a metaphor for the film. It's like nothing's pure, everything's complicated and thorny and difficult, and that's what this whole film is. It's just how difficult art is, how difficult life is. And even though they've got like a B, and C of the subject, you're still not going to work out exactly what they're about. That's what makes art great. That's what makes this film great. That's what makes Schrader's best films great. It's not just one thing. It's a very complicated world he's presenting. He doesn't always get there in some of his films. Some of his films become simplistic, but in this one he really gets there, and there's meaning within all these different scenes. He's got great collaborators. Partly these brother kind of pushed him to give it some sort of redemption at the end. Not redemption, more like some sort of meaning for Mishima, and his wife, who's also a collaborator, was the one who was pushing the brother as well to do that. And Schrader saw that it was needed, so he agreed with them. But he was going a bit darker to start with, then his collaborators kind of balanced that out, and so they helped create this very balanced film. And he had a really great production designer. Phil Glass did the score. The score was beautiful. It was constantly repeating little things and evolving it, and it becomes the score of a life that's trying to burst forth and find something. You know, it's very mysterious, very beautiful, and very much part of the film. It's like intrinsic to the film. So as you can see, I'm a big fan of Mishima. I really love it. I'm not going to go further. I'm just trying to get people to go see it. Again, Deadwood Bepper did a live stream a few weeks ago, but I was actually planned as a video before that as well, so it was just like, it was one I was going to do after I took a break. So it was just timing. If I got off the backside, I'd done it before the live stream, but I didn't. So I was too busy watching Bresson films. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back soon for another video, so I'll see you then.